Picture a world in turmoil, devastated by the catastrophic events of two world wars within a span of just 3 decades. This was a world on the brink, a world crying out for change, yearning for peace, and desperate for unity. Let's rewind back to the early 20th century. The League of Nations, born from the ashes of the First World War, was the first attempt at creating an international organization to maintain world peace. However, the League's inability to prevent the Second World War highlighted its fundamental weaknesses. It lacked enforcement power, had inadequate representation, and was marred by the non-participation of several key nations. Simultaneously, the world was witnessing a shift in power. The old empires were crumbling, and new superpowers were emerging. The United States and the Soviet Union, with their contrasting ideologies of capitalism and communism, were setting the stage for geopolitical tension. This tension, coupled with the devastating effects of World War II, created an urgent need for a new, more effective system of international cooperation and peacekeeping. This was a world scarred by 2 global conflicts that had claimed millions of lives. Cities lay in ruins, economies were shattered, and societies were torn apart. The horrifying consequences of these wars were felt by every nation, every community, and every individual. The world had seen the destructive potential of human conflict, and it was clear that a new path had to be charted. People around the globe, regardless of their nationality or political belief, were united by a common desire to never let such devastation occur again. They yearned for a world where disputes were settled not on battlefields but through dialogue and diplomacy. They longed for a world where nations worked together to address shared challenges and promote human progress. In this chaos and desperation, the seeds for a new global organization were sown, an organization that aimed to prevent such wars and promote peace. This was the birth of the United Nations. The journey towards the formation of the United Nations began with a declaration, a promise of a better world. In the throes of the Second World War, leaders from the Allied nations came together in 1941 to draft the Atlantic Charter. This document, although not a treaty, was a public statement of shared objectives and values. It spoke of a world where nations would not seek territorial expansion, where all people would have the right to self-determination, and where there would be cooperation for improved economic and social conditions for all. The Atlantic Charter was the seed from which the United Nations would grow. Just a year later, in 1942, the Declaration of United Nations was drafted. This document built upon the principles set out in the Atlantic Charter, and was a pledge by the 26 nations that signed it to continue their fight against the Axis powers. The Declaration of United Nations was the first time the term United Nations was used, a name suggested by President Franklin D. Roosevelt. Now, having set the principles, the next step was to lay the groundwork for the formation of this international organization. This happened at the Dumbarton Oaks Conference in 1944. Representatives from China, the Soviet Union, the United Kingdom, and the United States deliberated over the structure of the organization. They discussed the establishment of a General Assembly, a Security Council, an International Court of Justice, and an Economic and Social Council. The Dumbarton Oaks proposals, as they came to be known, were the blueprint for the United Nations Charter. So, with the Atlantic Charter setting the principles, the Declaration of United Nations affirming commitment, and the Dumbarton Oaks Conference laying the groundwork, the stage was set. The principles were in place, the vision was clear, and the structure was outlined. With the principles set and the groundwork laid, it was time for the nations of the world to come together and finalize the formation of the United Nations. April 1945, San Francisco. A historic moment when representatives of 50 nations gathered. The air was thick with anticipation and hope as world leaders convened to discuss the formation of a new international body. This was the San Francisco Conference, a seminal event that would lead to the birth of the United Nations. At this conference, the delegates worked tirelessly, negotiating the terms of what would become the United Nations Charter. The Charter was designed as a framework, a guideline for nations to follow to ensure peace, uphold human rights, and abide by international law. The Charter's preamble set the tone, stating a determination to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war. The delegates were all too aware of the horrors that war could bring. They had just emerged from the ashes of the Second World War, a conflict that had shaken the world to its core. They were determined to prevent such a catastrophe from happening again. The Charter also emphasized the importance of human rights. a concept that was gaining traction in the aftermath of the war. It called for the promotion of respect for human rights and for fundamental freedoms for all, without distinction as to race, sex, language, or religion. This was a revolutionary idea at the time, a commitment to a universal standard of human dignity that transcended borders. The Charter also established a commitment to international law. It declared that the United Nations would bring about the establishment of conditions under which justice and respect for the obligations arising from treaties and other sources of international law can be maintained. In essence, it sought to create a world where disputes between nations could be resolved peacefully, through dialogue and negotiation, rather than through violence and war. The San Francisco Conference culminated in the signing of the United Nations Charter. This marked the birth of the United Nations, a beacon of hope in a world that had seen too much darkness. With the signing of the Charter, the United Nations officially came into existence on October 24, 1945. From that day forward, the world had a new forum for dialogue, a new tool for peace, and a new hope for a better future. From its formation in 1945, the United Nations has grown into an indispensable part of our global community. Today it stands as a beacon of hope, a symbol of unity among nations, and a platform for collective action. The United Nations today plays a multifaceted role in our world. Its work spans across peacekeeping, humanitarian aid, and international cooperation, touching millions of lives every day. The blue helmets of the United Nations peacekeeping forces are a symbol of hope in regions torn apart by conflict. These brave individuals work tirelessly to prevent disputes from escalating into wars, protect civilians, and help countries transition to lasting peace. But the United Nations role doesn't stop at peacekeeping. It is also a vital provider of humanitarian aid. In times of crisis, be it natural disasters, famine, or disease outbreaks, the United Nations is often the first on the ground, delivering life-saving assistance. Through its various agencies like the World Food Program and UNICEF, the United Nations works relentlessly to alleviate human suffering and ensure that every child, woman, and man have access to basic human needs. And let's not forget the United Nations' role in fostering international cooperation. In an era of globalization and interdependence, the United Nations provides a unique platform for dialogue and negotiation. It brings together nations, civil society, and other stakeholders to tackle global challenges that no one nation can solve alone, such as climate change, poverty, and inequality. The United Nations embodies the spirit of collective action. By joining forces, we can overcome the most daunting challenges, create a more equitable world, and ensure a better future for all. In a world that's more interconnected than ever, the United Nations continues to work towards its founding principles, promoting peace, upholding human rights, and fostering international cooperation. In the span of a decade, the world went from war-torn despair to the birth of an organization that symbolized hope and unity. The journey we've traced in this video is a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the power of cooperation and collective action. We began by looking at the world before the United Nations, a world that was grappling with the aftermath of the First World War. The League of Nations, the predecessor of the UN, was unable to prevent the escalation of conflicts that eventually led to the Second World War. Then, we followed the road to San Francisco, where delegates from 50 countries gathered in the spring of 1945. These world leaders were determined to create an organization that would ensure that the horrors of the past would never be repeated. With the signing of the United Nations Charter, they laid the foundation for a new era of international relations. The birth of the United Nations marked a turning point in history. It was an acknowledgement that only through global cooperation could we resolve our differences and prevent wars. The UN was tasked with promoting peace, fostering friendly relations among nations, and working towards social progress and better living standards for all. Fast forward to the present day, and the United Nations continues to play a pivotal role in maintaining global peace and promoting cooperation. Despite the challenges and criticisms it faces, the UN has been instrumental in mediating conflicts, promoting human rights, and addressing pressing global issues like climate change and poverty. The United Nations, born out of necessity and hope, continues to play a crucial role in maintaining global peace and promoting cooperation. It stands as a testament to humanity's ability to unite in the face of adversity.